The billionaire smiled for the cameras, his hand resting casually on the shoulder of a woman half his age. Flashbulbs lit up the night as the two of them entered the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where deals worth millions were sealed over wine and whispered promises. To the outside world, it was a picture of success, a man at the very height of his power, with everything he could ever want within reach. But that evening, under the soft glow of chandeliers and the hushed murmurs of high society, his past walked straight back into his life. Just a few tables away sat the woman he had once vowed to love forever, the woman he left behind when ambition mattered more than family. She was silent, watching, her hand resting gently on her stomach, and she was pregnant. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The billionaire smiled for the cameras, his hand resting on the shoulder of a woman half his age. The entrance of the restaurant was crowded with flashing lights, journalists eager to capture the perfect photograph of America's golden couple. He looked untouchable, the embodiment of wealth and power, with his sharp suit and measured confidence. But as he stepped past the velvet ropes and into the quiet hum of clinking glasses and whispered conversation, he had no idea that his carefully built world was about to be shaken. Just a few tables away, in the same glittering room, sat the woman he had once vowed to love forever. She was quiet, her presence unnoticed by most, yet impossible to ignore for him. Her hand resting gently on her stomach, she was pregnant. For years, he had lived as though she no longer existed, erasing her from the story of his rise to the top. The magazines, the interviews, the glossy headlines, none mentioned the woman who had been there before the fortune, before the recognition, before the world called him a visionary. She had loved him when he was just another dreamer, with little more than ambition and restless determination. And yet in the pursuit of glory, he walked away from her without hesitation. Now here she was, a quiet storm, sitting only a few feet from his perfect new life, a secret growing inside her that could undo everything. Who was she really to him now? A memory? A mistake? Or the beginning of his downfall? Why had he left her behind, abandoning the vows they once whispered in the shadows of youth? Was it pride, greed, or fear of being tied to the version of himself he wished to bury? These were the questions that would soon grip not just his private conscience, but the public stage as well. For her reappearance was no accident, and her silence in that restaurant carried the weight of years of betrayal. Every empire has its cracks, and this was the moment his began to show. By the end of this story, one woman would reclaim everything she lost, and a man who believed he could escape his past would learn that some debts cannot be erased. Ethan Caldwell was a man the world admired, a billionaire whose name appeared in business magazines, a symbol of ambition realized. But what the public never saw was the cost of that ambition. He built his empire, but in the process, he destroyed his family. To investors, he was a genius who could not fail. To the media, he was a visionary shaping the future. But to the woman who had given him everything, he was someone else entirely. Claire Caldwell had stood by him when he was unknown, when the only thing he had to offer was a dream. She believed in that dream so completely that she sacrificed her own. She gave up her career, postponed her ambitions, and worked nights so he could chase opportunities. She became his confidant, his stability, the one person who believed in him when no one else did. And in return, he left her behind. Claire's love story was not one of glamour or luxury. It was built on small sacrifices, quiet moments, and unshakable belief. She was there when the bank rejected his first loan, when his ideas failed, when disappointment threatened to break him. She reminded him of his worth when the world dismissed him. She celebrated victories no one else cared about, believing each step forward was a step toward the life they were building together.
But as Ethan climbed higher, the foundation of that love story weakened. With each new success, his attention shifted away from Claire and toward a world that celebrated him, a world where she was no longer included. The more he was praised, the more invisible she became. She had built his world brick by brick, and then, when the walls were finally standing, he chose to walk away, leaving her outside the very home she had helped create. The cruelty of it was not loud or violent. It was subtle, calculated, and devastating. Claire noticed the small changes before the final collapse. He stopped asking about her day, stopped noticing the details that once connected them, stopped valuing the partnership they once shared. Business trips became longer, his calls home less frequent, and the warmth that once defined their marriage faded into silence. When Ethan finally ended their marriage, he did so without hesitation, without pause, as if the years of loyalty and sacrifice meant little. For Claire, it was the moment she realized that her love story had been rewritten without her consent, and her role as wife and partner had been erased in favor of an image that better suited his empire. And yet what Ethan failed to see was that Claire's story was far from over. She may have been cast aside, but she had not been defeated. In Ethan's new world, there was Olivia. Young, radiant, and glamorous, she quickly became the face that the media adored. To the press, Olivia was perfection, the woman who matched Ethan's wealth and status, the partner who elevated his image. Together they embodied success, photographed at red carpets, celebrated in glossy magazines, admired by those who envied their lifestyle. But Olivia was not chosen for love in the way Claire once was. She was chosen because she represented everything Ethan wanted the world to see: youth, beauty, and power. Her presence at his side was as much a statement as it was companionship. She was a trophy, a symbol that his empire had no flaws, no cracks. And while the world cheered for the new couple, few realized what her presence truly meant for Claire. It was proof that in Ethan's eyes, she had been replaced, discarded, made invisible. For many women watching from the outside, Claire's story was painfully familiar. She had given her best years to a man she believed in, only to be discarded once she no longer fit the image he wanted to project. Olivia was not the enemy. She was simply a reflection of what Claire had been replaced with, the younger version of a role Claire once held. This was not a battle between two women, but a story about a man who believed he could erase his past without consequence. And yet, as Claire sat in that restaurant, her hand resting on her stomach, she carried with her something Ethan could not control, something that connected them forever. The world saw Ethan as untouchable, but in truth, his entire empire balanced on a single truth he thought he had buried. The woman he had abandoned was the one who still held the power to undo him.
The night of the dinner was meant to be another celebration of Ethan Caldwell's power. The press was waiting at the entrance, their cameras firing in rapid bursts as he escorted Olivia through the grand doors of the city's most exclusive restaurant. Inside, the glow of chandeliers reflected off crystal glasses, and whispers of admiration followed them as they moved to their table. To the crowd, they were flawless, the picture of elegance and wealth. Ethan leaned close to Olivia, whispering words only she could hear, his confidence unshaken, his smile unwavering. But just across the room, unnoticed by the crowd, but impossible for him to ignore, sat Claire Caldwell. She did not stand, did not call his name, did not demand attention. She simply watched, her expression unreadable, her hand resting gently on her stomach. In that single moment, the world Ethan had so carefully crafted collided with the one he thought he had erased. For Ethan, time slowed in that instant. The hum of conversation blurred into silence, the clinking of glasses felt distant, and the only thing that mattered was her presence. The woman he had abandoned, the one he thought would fade quietly into memory, was seated just a few tables away, her very existence threatening to unravel everything. Olivia noticed the shift immediately. She leaned in, asking what was wrong, her voice soft but edged with curiosity. Ethan brushed her off, pretending nothing had happened, but his eyes betrayed him. They kept returning to Claire, to the quiet strength in her posture, to the weight of what she carried. For Claire was not just a ghost from his past. She was a reminder of promises broken, sacrifices discarded, and a truth that could no longer be ignored. A wife discarded, a child not yet born, a man caught between two lives. Around them, the restaurant carried on as if nothing had changed. Waiters delivered plates of carefully arranged dishes, conversations swelled and softened, and the world moved on, unaware of the tension at that single table. But for Ethan Caldwell, the air was thick with unease. He could not shake the image of Claire, her quiet composure, the knowledge that every glance she gave him carried years of betrayal, grief, and unspoken power. Olivia followed his gaze, her suspicion rising as she studied the woman who seemed to command Ethan's attention without saying a word. For a man used to control, used to dictating every narrative of his life, this moment felt like the beginning of something he could not stop. And while the cameras outside would capture smiles and glamour, the truth inside the restaurant was far different. The past had not disappeared. It was seated only a few feet away, watching, waiting. The longer the evening went on, the heavier the silence between Ethan and Olivia became. She asked questions he avoided, pressed for explanations he would not give. Claire never approached, never interrupted the meal, but her presence alone was enough to fracture the illusion Ethan had worked years to build. Each time he raised his glass or tried to focus on Olivia, his eyes betrayed him, flicking back to the woman who carried not just his past, but his legacy. For Claire was not simply pregnant. She was the embodiment of everything Ethan wanted to forget, everything he had buried under layers of wealth and public adoration. And yet here she was, carrying the one truth that could not be hidden. The world outside saw a billionaire at the peak of his power, but inside that room, Ethan Caldwell felt the ground beneath him begin to tremble. And in that single glance, the past came crashing into the present. A wife discarded, a child not yet born, a man caught between two lives. The evening that began as a celebration had turned into a reckoning. Ethan's silence at the table grew heavier, Olivia's questions sharper, and Claire's calm more unshakable. To anyone else, it may have seemed like a coincidence, a chance meeting in the city. But for Ethan, it was something far greater, something that would not end when the dinner plates were cleared. This was the return of a chapter he had closed, and it came with consequences he had never prepared for. The question was no longer whether his empire would endure, but how quickly it would begin to fall. And so, the only question that remained was this: was Claire's presence a coincidence, or the beginning of Ethan Caldwell's downfall? The morning after the dinner, the headlines spread like wildfire. Photographs of Ethan Caldwell and Olivia arriving at the restaurant were plastered across the front pages. But it was the grainy images from inside that caught the world's attention. A woman seated nearby, her hand resting on her stomach, her expression calm yet commanding. Claire Caldwell. The captions wrote themselves. Ex-wife returns pregnant. The story was irresistible. The billionaire who left his wife for a younger woman, only to face her again in the most public way imaginable. For years, Ethan had controlled his image with precision, each detail of his life curated to perfection. But this was different.
This was a story he could not silence, a narrative he could not control. Within hours, Claire had gone from forgotten ex-wife to the subject of endless speculation, her name trending across every platform, her presence impossible to ignore. In boardrooms, unease spread quickly. Investors who had once praised Ethan's decisiveness now whispered doubts. Could a man embroiled in scandal still lead a company worth billions? Shareholders feared distraction, reputational damage, instability. Calls poured in, questions mounted, and the polished confidence that had always surrounded Ethan Caldwell began to erode. His empire, built on the foundation of trust and vision, now seemed vulnerable. Meanwhile, Olivia felt the weight of a spotlight she had not anticipated. The woman the media once adored as his perfect partner was suddenly cast in the shadow of Claire's return. For every photograph of Olivia smiling by Ethan's side, there was now an image of Claire, dignified, expectant, the woman who had given Ethan his beginnings. The contrast was stark, and the public noticed. Ethan was no longer the only character in his story. Claire had reappeared, and with her came the uncomfortable truth he had tried to bury. But while Ethan scrambled to manage the fallout, Claire did something unexpected. She did not hide, she did not retreat into silence. Instead, she stepped forward. She spoke carefully, not with bitterness, but with grace, sharing glimpses of her past with Ethan in interviews that captivated the public. She told stories of the early years, of the sacrifices made, of the man she believed in long before the world knew his name. Her words were steady, her voice calm, her presence magnetic. People saw in her a strength that transcended scandal. She became, almost overnight, a figure of sympathy, a woman who had endured betrayal but carried herself with dignity. For the first time in years, the spotlight wasn't on him. It was on her. Claire Caldwell was no longer invisible. She had become the face of resilience, and the public could not look away.
The scandal deepened as whispers turned into investigations. Reporters and analysts began piecing together a timeline, and with each new detail, the questions grew heavier. Claire Caldwell's pregnancy was no longer a private matter. It was a matter of public intrigue. The timing aligned too closely with the final months of her marriage to Ethan Caldwell, suggesting that he had known, or at least suspected, long before she appeared at that restaurant. But if that was true, why had he remained silent? Why had he allowed the world to believe she had simply faded away? Then came the leaks. Screenshots of private messages surfaced. Conversations allegedly between Ethan's attorneys and close advisors. They discussed settlements, payments, offers designed to keep Claire out of sight and out of mind. Though Ethan denied their authenticity, the damage was already done. The more he spoke, the less the public believed him. Friends and family from Claire's past stepped forward, some reluctantly, others with conviction. They spoke of nights when she cried quietly after Ethan left, of her refusal to take money in exchange for her silence, of her determination to raise her child with or without his support. Their words painted a picture that the public could not ignore. Claire as the betrayed, the woman who sacrificed everything, and Ethan as the man who discarded her when she no longer fit the story he wanted to tell. Olivia, too, could no longer escape the shadow of doubt. Reporters asked whether she had known about Claire, whether she had been complicit in silencing the truth. Her polished image began to crack under the pressure, her once adored presence now seen as a symbol of Ethan's arrogance rather than his triumph. Every layer of his carefully constructed life began to unravel, one revelation at a time.
But with every truth came questions that made the scandal even murkier. Had Ethan really tried to pay Claire off, as the leaked documents suggested? Or were these stories planted by those who stood to gain from his fall? Was Olivia just another victim, unaware of the depth of his betrayal? Or had she known more than she claimed? And perhaps the most tantalizing question of all, was Claire herself orchestrating this moment? Some speculated that her reappearance at the restaurant had been no accident, that she had planned it all to expose him when the world would be watching. Ethan's defenders clung to this theory, suggesting she was motivated by revenge, not justice. But for the millions watching from the outside, the answer mattered less than the image. Claire was calm, poised, and undeniable. Ethan was defensive, uncertain, and cornered. Every question raised more doubt, and every doubt chipped away at his empire. As the investigation unfolded, a new rumor began to spread, one that offered Ethan Caldwell a glimmer of hope, but at the same time threatened to drag the story into even deeper uncertainty. Whispers suggested that the child Claire Caldwell carried might not be his at all. Anonymous sources claimed she had been seen with another man after the divorce, that perhaps the timing was less certain than it appeared. For Ethan's supporters, it became the perfect defense. If the child wasn't his, then the scandal was built on nothing more than speculation. Tabloids ran headlines questioning Claire's integrity, and commentators debated endlessly whether she had misled the public. But through it all, Claire remained calm. She did not lash out. She did not falter. Her silence was not weakness, but strategy, a quiet confidence that left everyone wondering what she knew that the rest of the world did not. For Olivia, however, the rumors marked a turning point. Once admired as Ethan's glamorous partner, she now faced a storm she had not anticipated. Questions followed her everywhere. Had she known about Claire's pregnancy? Was she aware of Ethan's attempts to silence his ex-wife? And if the child was not his, why was Ethan unable to distance himself from the story? The mounting pressure became unbearable, and Olivia began to retreat from the public eye. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she distanced herself from Ethan. Photographs of them together grew scarce. Her once frequent social media posts turned quiet, and whispers of tension between them surfaced. For a man whose image depended on appearances, Olivia's absence was more damaging than her presence had ever been. It was a silent statement. Whatever truth eventually came out, she no longer wanted to stand beside him when it did. Behind the scenes, Claire was preparing for the inevitable. While the world speculated, and Ethan clung to the possibility that the rumors might save him, she quietly gathered what she had kept hidden. Documents, timelines, medical records, evidence that did not simply suggest, but proved the truth. She allowed the speculation to run its course, allowed the world to question her integrity, knowing that the moment of revelation would be all the more powerful. Claire's strength was not in loud accusations, but in patience, in letting Ethan twist beneath the weight of uncertainty. For the first time, she held the power, and she understood its weight. Every passing day brought her closer to the moment when speculation would end, and truth would cut through every rumor, every denial, every excuse Ethan had tried to build. And when the truth came out, it was more devastating than anyone could imagine.
The speculation ended when the medical records surfaced. There was no ambiguity, no uncertainty, no room for doubt. The child that Claire Caldwell carried was Ethan Caldwell's. The confirmation hit the media like a thunderclap. The rumors that had cast shadows on Claire's integrity dissolved in an instant, leaving behind only the undeniable truth. Ethan was the father.
His empire, already shaken by weeks of scandal, now faced its most devastating blow. The image of the untouchable billionaire, the man who could control every narrative, shattered in the face of facts he could not erase. The world saw not a visionary or a genius, but a man who had abandoned his wife while she carried his child. A man who had walked away from the very foundation of his life. And as the truth spread, sympathy turned fully toward Claire, who had carried more than just a child. She had carried his betrayal. The twist was not in the pregnancy alone, but in the evidence Claire had safeguarded all along. Hidden in her possession were emails and recordings, messages exchanged between Ethan and his lawyers, conversations that revealed the lengths he had gone to distance himself from her and to erase her from his story. They detailed settlements offered, silence demanded, and the cold calculations of a man who wanted to protect his image at any cost. Hearing Ethan's own words played back, dismissive, cruel, dismissing Claire as an obstacle rather than a partner, was devastating for the public who had once celebrated him. It stripped away the polished veneer and revealed a man willing to sacrifice everything, even his family, for the illusion of control. Claire had not only endured the betrayal, but had documented it, ensuring that when the truth finally came, it would be undeniable. The emotional weight of that revelation was not lost on anyone. For years, Claire Caldwell had been silent, carrying not just Ethan's child, but the crushing burden of what he had done to her. She lived with the knowledge that the man she once trusted had abandoned her in her most vulnerable moment. And yet, instead of collapsing under that weight, she transformed it into strength. The world saw her not as a victim, but as a woman who had endured and emerged stronger. Her composure, her patience, and her dignity turned the scandal into a story of resilience. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell faced the harshest truth of all. Karma had arrived, and it was merciless. The empire he had built on ambition and betrayal was crumbling, not at the hands of rivals or competitors, but by the quiet, steadfast power of the woman he thought he had left behind. The courtroom became the stage where the final act of Ethan Caldwell's downfall played out. Cameras lined the steps outside, journalists jostled for space, and the world watched as the man once hailed as a financial genius sat across from the woman he had cast aside. Claire Caldwell entered with quiet dignity, her presence commanding more attention than Ethan's lawyers could have ever anticipated. The proceedings laid bare the story that had already captured the public's imagination. A man who abandoned his wife while he carried his child, a man who tried to erase the very foundation of his success, and a woman who had carried the truth with patience and resolve. The verdict came as no surprise. Claire won a massive settlement, securing not only financial justice, but something far greater, the acknowledgement that her sacrifices, her loyalty, and her resilience could not be erased from the story of Ethan Caldwell's empire. Outside the courtroom, public opinion shifted completely. Claire was no longer seen as a forgotten ex-wife. She became a symbol of strength, of endurance, of the quiet power that comes from refusing to be silenced. Media outlets praised her grace under pressure. Women across the country hailed her as an inspiration, and her story sparked conversations about betrayal, ambition, and justice. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell's credibility collapsed. Investors pulled away, board members distanced themselves, and the company he had built with relentless ambition began to crumble. He was no longer the untouchable billionaire. He was a man defined by his failures, his arrogance, and his inability to face the truth. The empire he thought would make him immortal was falling apart, and there was nothing left for him to control. The woman he once believed belonged to his past was now the one shaping his future. Olivia's departure came quietly but decisively. For months she had stood beside Ethan, smiling for the cameras, playing her part in the carefully constructed image of perfection. But when the truth became undeniable, when the weight of Ethan's betrayal poisoned everything it touched, she walked away. Her absence spoke louder than any statement. The photographs that once captured them together now seemed like relics of a lie. For Ethan, her departure was the final crack in the image he had tried so desperately to protect. He had lost the woman who once adored him, the partner who built him, the public who celebrated him, and the future he believed was secure. And in losing all of that, he faced the reality he had avoided for years. He was alone, stripped of power, stripped of trust, and left to face the shadow of his own choices. He thought she was part of his past. Instead, she became his reckoning. Claire Caldwell did not need revenge delivered in anger or spectacle. Her justice came through patience, through truth, and through the quiet endurance that exposed Ethan's empire for what it truly was. His downfall was not orchestrated by rivals or enemies, but by the consequences of his own actions, revealed by the very woman he thought he had underestimated. In the end, Ethan Caldwell's story was not about triumph, but about the cost of ambition unchecked by loyalty, the emptiness of power built on betrayal, and the inevitability of truth. Claire had lost years. She had endured heartbreak, but she emerged more than a survivor. She emerged as a symbol, living proof that no matter how high a man builds his empire, it only takes one truth to bring it all crashing down. For women everywhere who have been overlooked, underestimated, or cast aside, Claire Caldwell's story is proof that silence is not defeat. She was the woman erased from the narrative, the partner dismissed when she no longer fit the image of success, the sacrifice that was supposed to be forgotten. But when the moment came, she did not need fury or spectacle. She only needed truth. She carried not only Ethan's child, but the weight of his betrayal, and with patience and composure, she turned that weight into power. Her resilience became her greatest weapon, and in the end, survival itself became her justice. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is not destruction, but endurance, not anger, but dignity. Claire Caldwell emerged not as a victim, but as a heroine, a reminder that even when discarded, a woman's story can become the one that outlasts an empire. Ethan Caldwell thought his story was of ambition, wealth, and victory, but history will remember him differently. His empire collapsed, his image shattered, and the legacy he wanted to protect was rewritten by the very woman he had abandoned. Olivia left him. The board turned against him, and the public that once praised him watched his downfall with a mix of shock and inevitability. But this story was never just about Ethan. It was about Claire, the woman who endured, who refused to disappear, who reclaimed her place when the world least expected it. Her story is not only hers, it belongs to every woman who has been told she is replaceable, every woman who has been silenced, every woman who has been left behind. For them, this is a reminder, no matter how powerful the man, the truth will always carry its own kind of justice. And now the question is yours. Do you believe Claire planned this moment, or was it fate? Was her appearance at that dinner a carefully chosen reckoning, or the inevitable return of truth that could no longer be hidden? Let us know in the comments because we want to hear what you think. And if you found yourself caught in this story of betrayal, power, and justice, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Subscribe for more stories where truth and betrayal collide, and where the lives that are cast aside become the ones we cannot forget.